Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In this episode, I will try to explain different things, such as different lighting setups, physics supported lights, non-playable 0G camera movement with the help of sequencer, and physics interaction. And the pack that I'm using for this scene is created by Mr. Sergey Tyapkin, and thank you very much to him for this amazing quality assets. So here is the scene, and let's look around quickly. There are so many little different stuff I placed, and this area is using the backlight and BakeGI. And some of the light sources are set to movable in this point. But when we pass this door, this is where the fully movable lighting starts. After this point, we will try to understand how it works after showing the first area. So let's change the mode to unlit from the lit and see what is going on in the scene. It's generally a static scene. There is not so many interactions, but all the flying stuff almost using the physics interaction when we play the game. When the camera hit them, they actually goes off and float around in 0G. So we have a stair which is going nowhere, and a maintenance shaft going down, and that's all basically. Let's start with the first area and the lighting setup that I'm using for this. First, we have a point light here, which is fitting with the dimensions of this fluorescent light, and it's using the candela units, and the attenuation radius is set to default, and only the source radius and the source length is important for matching with this fluorescent light. And the indirect lighting intensity is set to 2 for this point light contribute to indirect lighting in this value. And let's look at the other light, which is mentioned before as the physics supported lights. So how it works is really simple, and we have a mesh, and it's a movable mesh because when we are simulating the game, this physics object can interact with the other ones, and moving around depends on the physics interaction. And we have a one movable spotlight in this mesh, which is parented to this mesh, and it creates dynamically volumetric lighting effect and casting the dynamic shadows when it's flying around. For example, if we touch this when we playing the game or while the sequencer is playing, you can actually touch it and push it away and create a little dynamic effect while it's flying in the corridor, like from here to there. And in this area, we have another point lights here and here, and they are using again candela units, and the intensity is set to 4, which is static light again, and indirect lighting intensity is set to 2, like the other one, and the temperature is set to 3000 400, which is really close to tungsten light color. and I changed the source length and the source radius to match with the dimensions of this part, this mesh. And also let me check again. Yes, these fluorescent meshes are using the use emissive for static lighting function, and if I delete this point light, it will create the lighting effect in this area, but I wanted to support this mesh with this static point light to create a much more softer and realistic looking lighting effect in this area. So when we look at the ceiling, there is no harsh and hard edge shadows we can see. So it's really soft lighting in this place. So this one is static light again, but it's using almost the same values with the other ones, but again it's supporting the this emissive area when we bake the light, like the other ones, and it's again creating really soft shadows when we bake it. Let's look at the inside, the side room. Here in this area we have two movable spotlights, and they are creating a really nice volume effect while we passing this corridor, and they are creating this light shaft in the corridor, which is really supporting the mood that I want to set. And it looks like there is so many dust in the corridor, because as you can see the environment is really messed up and there are so many things flying around while we're playing the game. And they are also using volumetric shadows like this. You can enable it. If you disable it, it cut through the wall and it doesn't look like so realistic. And the scattering, volumetric scattering intensity is default. I didn't push it up, and the reason is when you do that, sometimes you can see the jittering on the where the lights start to cast, like in this area you can see stare effect while you're playing it. Here is another static light, and I actually made a mistake by using the temperature value and the green color at the same time. So if you are using the color, please turn off the temperature so these values doesn't override each other when you bake it. And here is one another light. This mesh is using only emissive for static lighting, so as you can see there is no any other lights. So the lighting is coming from the mesh directly to lit this area. And we have one spotlight here, which is a volumetric light again, and creating this really nice volumetric shadow effect. And this one is using a light function which I created for this light, and here is the light function setup for you can see easily. Time node and the constant nodes multiplied with this value, and I'm using the sine node and the frac node to get this flickering effect. I don't want it so smooth, I don't want it so repetitive, so I pump up the values a little bit, so we can't notice the repetition on this value. And the material on this mesh also has flickering material to match with the effect that I'm using for the spotlight. So as you can see on the wall, the spotlight is creating the flickering effect, but when we look at this area, it's creating an illusion like something coming from the light is coming from this mesh and creating this effect. So it's really useful when you are using a flickering light function on your light, but also you might want to use a material to support that lighting effect on your lighting mesh, which can be a light bulb or computer screen or any kind of emitters is possible. So here is another example, but this one is not using volumetric lighting. So we have 2 point lights in this area, and these point lights are using the same material function again, and they are using IES texture to create this nice arc shape on the surfaces. So how is that possible? These lights are not casting any volumetric effect like this. It's really simple. Just select your light and type volumetric scattering intensity, and it's set to 0. The reason is when you are using the IES lighting texture, sometimes the intensity end up like this. I think it's much more better. Okay, let's leave it like this. And we have one more point light here, but this one is stationary light. And the reason is this door in some point will be open and we want dynamic shadows on it. Also, when the door opens, I want to create lighting effect on this little area dynamically. So that's why I set this mesh as movable, and I set this light as stationary light instead of static. It can be movable, but when we bake the light, we can't use any GI effect in this area. So here is another room that we are using one different light. Excuse me, 2 different lights. The first one is the really simple movable spotlight, which is creating this really nice volume effect. When we get behind the stairs, it's creating the shafts like this, like this, like this. And it's really good to use warm and cold colors if you want to create the contrast. And this one is the cold one, and this one is the warm one, which is the alarm light for the ship. And before that, I want to say something about this one. And this is a static mesh. It's not flying around while we're playing the game, and it's again using material for static lighting. So let's turn back to the alarm light that I'm using for the level. Here you can see 2 different spotlights and speed value, and this speed value is coming from the blueprint that I wrote for the light, and it's really simple, it's really useful. You can create different things with this setup, like the police lights or some kind of maybe disco ball effect or another thing that you need to create. So basically this light is turning around like this in this axis, which is the z-axis, and creating the dynamic effect like this while we playing the game, when we playing the game. And it's really nice to see the shadows dancing around and creating the dynamic fog effect in the scene. So let's jump to the darkest area in the level. As you can see, there is no any other light sources in the area. We have only one light, which is here, and it's actually a flashlight. When we look at the flashlight closely, we have two different lights inside of this mesh. I mean it's a blueprint. It's really easy to set up. So let's look at it. Actually, we have a really simple setup for this flashlight, but I'm not using in the level. When we place the light anywhere in the level, and if it's enabled, actually the speed value is 0. If it's higher than 0, it constantly turns in the y-axis, and it's creating like the it's floating in 0G. It's creating really nice illusion, and with the help of this spotlight and the point light, it's really creating really nice lighting effect. And let's look at the lights. The spotlight is the point light. I'm using the attenuation radius 12 because I don't want this light interact with the level. It's only for lighting up this front area when we look at the flashlight, the angle like this. It's directly filling the camera when we look at it and creating the really nice dirt mask effect on the camera with the help of the post-processing. And the spotlight is the functional one, and the values are almost default, and I set the volumetric scattering intensity really close to 0 because I don't want really dense fog when we are using this flashlight in the level. And the temperature is set to 3100, which is close to the tungsten light color, but it's changing when we are using the LUT texture, LUT table on the post-processing volume. But when you start the level, it's good to know it's set to something realistic. So let's type here something like this, and let's play the level as a spectator and see what happens. Okay, now everything is start to fly around, and you can see our physics supported lights is creating a really nice effect, and the barrels flying around and creating the dynamic shadows coming from this mesh. And also here we have some kind of science fiction boxes flying around. And let's look at the other meshes like this. They all using physics to create this 0G effect, and I placed them manually in the level. And this notepaper is not physical mesh, it's an actor which is using a blueprint and creating a special float effect in the level, because I don't want this go anywhere. I want this mesh create a dynamic volumetric fog effect and dynamic shadow effect when the camera closed like this. And here is the particles, as you can see, and there's an effect like the heat is melted the surface on the ground and damage the walls like this, which is coming from a decal that I prepared before. And if I play this here, now you can see alarm light that I talked about it before is creating really nice volumetric lighting in this level, and there is so many things are flying around. Okay, stop this here, and let's look at the flashlight that we type 30 for the speed value in the blueprint. So you can see the light cookie texture on the ground, and it's really nice texture to get in the level. When you're playing it, it looks much more realistic, and the volumetric lighting is not so dense. It looks good to me, and this is how it works. And let's set the speed value to 0, because after this point the player will take the flashlight, and we don't want it constantly turning around while the sequencer is playing, because when we start the sequencer it actually hit this button and plays the level automatically. So let's start the sequencer and let's see what happens when we pass the lighted area and using the flashlight. Okay, now the level is started and the sequencer is playing now as a player in the level. The physics objects are flying around, and on the ceiling there is cable actors using again the gravity, like there is no gravity, and they are flying around randomly and colliding with the other meshes in the level. Now we can see the alarm light behind the glass, and it's barely visible in this point because of the thick glass. and we can see the reflections on the glass material. And our camera is going forward and stops here like this. Now we can see the stair light behind the box, and it's really creating spooky mood in that area. Now we are seeing the movable light that I'm using on the ceiling, which is creating the dynamic flickering effect, lighting up the photo here, and the notebook, which is a blueprint, not a physics actor, and the static mesh that we are using to lit up that little corner. And now we will see the dirt mask effect when we look at the mesh like this. I can see the FPS is really low because at the same time I'm taking a record, a screen capture, and it's not a so powerful machine, so sorry for that if it's bothering you. We can see the other flickering light on the barrel, and this is the place where you can see the alarm light is functional, and the static lighting mesh standing there in the corner, right corner. And we have one more particle behind the door, which is covering the empty area behind the door. It's a particle which is emitting light sources and creating the nice fire effect on the edge of the door near the glass part. Okay, now our character is really close to open the door. Actually, really close to pass the door. The door opens itself. Okay, after the deadly FPS drop, we finally can pass the door. And you can see the stationary light is creating the lighting effect behind the door. On the ground you can see it clearly. There's a nice blue lighting effect. And we have dust particles flying around to create much more depth feeling in the level. Actually, it supports the mood, like there is so many things are flying around randomly. And the flashlight is taking the place of point of interest. So, and now it's creating the dirt mask effect with the post-processing, with the help of the post-processing and filling the camera. And it's a reverse lighting effect that you can't see the behind the light source, which is a good thing to use to create much more suspense, like somebody turned a really powerful spot into your eyes directly in the middle of the night. Now the players take the flashlight, and after this point our level will be fully movable. Only this flashlight we will use in short to see what is going on. I need to say this is not an actual gameplay or something like that. It's not scripted. So how is that possible? The light source coming with us and looking directly to camera's direction and feeling the actually creating the illusion like we are holding the flashlight in front of us. It's a keyframe animation, and we will talk about that too in the next steps. And as you can see, the objects are using the physics, and the camera can actually hit them. If you notice, sometimes the flashlight is creating overexposed in the certain places like this. In my opinion, it creates much more realistic effect because the camera not every time sets its values to adjust the proper to get the proper light from the lens like in real life. And I think overexpose effect is creating a really nice illusion, realistic solution in this case. Also, the flashlight, the source in the flashlight, I mean the spotlight, is not reaching the everywhere in the level like this. You can see it clearly. You can see the stairs clearly, but you can't see the corridor because the attenuation rate is not high enough to lit up that part. I made it like that because I really want to set the mood a little spooky, a little mysterious, while the audience is watching. I think it's creating much more claustrophobic effect when we see the lighting effects in the level. Much more suspense, I think. Also, the spotlight and intensity is not adjusted itself. Depends on the distance. It's fixed value, and the worm attack. In this place, I made again keyframe animation for the spotlight because our character is cannot control himself properly, and it's really hard to control the light if you are rolling around without any control. As you can see, sometimes the flashlight is coming closer, and sometimes it disappears because I want to create an effect like the player or the character is changing its position, depends on the movement in the 0G. Okay, this is where I cut the bad animation, and it will be much more better after editing because I wanted to create an effect like the worm is damaging the camera and it's cutting the video stream from the camera, and the light is fixed now. Okay, we talk about the lighting in the level, and let's look at them quickly again before we jump into the post-processing settings in the level. So the level is using the bake lighting, and the other part is, which is this area, using the movable light, and the level and the lights in the levels and their placements are based on where the light emitters, like this fluorescent light and this fluorescent light, this one, actually this is a physics supported movable light that we talked about before, and this one, these two here, and this one. When you are making lighting in your level, it's really useful. You can analyze the scene by searching what kind of emitters you have. I mean, do you have any fluorescence in the level which is turned on, or do you have meshes something like this? Is it working or not? Or you have monitors like this and they are emitting light or not? I mean, in short, start by searching the possible light emitters. After then, the composition and the mood come together slowly. Let's jump into the post-processing settings in the level. Here is my post-processing volume, which is infinite extent, which is unbound. So it means wherever you go, you will get the post-process effects in your camera. Here is the LUT table that I'm using for the level. All these LUT tables are custom LUT tables that I create before this level, and let's look at, for example, this one and this one, or the blue wash, maybe, I don't know, maybe the warm tint, something like that. I prefer this one, which is crushing the blacks and turning up the colors in the level. Changing the LUT table is really depends on you, or you can completely turn it off. It's your opinion, it's your artistic vision. So this is mine, and that's why I'm using this one. The other thing is that I'm using is the chromatic aberration. I don't know if I remember clearly, but the other name is fringe, which is set to 0.5 in this case, and 1 is too much, and 0.4 and 0.6, and between that values works for me in this level. Okay, this is the dirt mask texture that I'm using for the camera, which is creating the lens effect when the camera is looking to really bright zone, really bright area in the level, such as the light sources that we have in this area, or the fluorescent light on the ceiling, or the particle that you use. And the other setting is that I'm using is the minimum brightness and the maximum brightness. When you open the new level in Unreal Engine, or when you start a new project, the auto exposure is turned on in the engine. You can fix it by typing 1 and 1 for the minimum and maximum brightness, or you directly go to your project settings and type here auto exposure or exposure, and it's unchecked right now, and it's disabling your eye adaptation settings in the level. Okay, the image effects. The vignette intensity is set to 0.5. What is the vignette effect? It's creating the black area at the corners of the camera view, like this, and it's coming from the real world. The light is not going inside the camera when the light is passing the lens, and the value is not same on the edges of the lens and the center of the lens, so that's why these areas are a little bit black. And the grain jitter and the grain intensity, it's just giving little noise on the camera. For cosmetics, I just use this. I don't want it too much. I don't want it without any grain. I mean the capturing. So that's why I added in here, because I wanted to create everything as much as I can in the Unreal Engine without doing any post effects in another software. The other setting is the ambient occlusion. The intensity is set to 1. If you watch the intersection between meshes, you can see the dark area is coming up, and this one is the radius of it. The global illumination settings is changed, as you can see. The indirect lighting intensity is set to 1.5. What it does is it's boosting the indirect lighting in your level. Default must be 1. Let's see. Okay, let's take it back like this. And the good thing is, if you change this value, you don't have to bake the lights again. It's already baked. I didn't touch the motion blur effect. I didn't touch the screen space reflections. And that's all for the post-processing effects in our shiny level. The other thing is that I want to talk about is the world settings, and as you can see, the Lightmap settings are completely default. I didn't touch anything. I didn't type any other settings or something like that. I just reset the settings, which is coming with the demonstration map, which is all this level. I just add this part and this corridor, stairs, maintenance shaft, and this little part here. So the Lightmap settings is the key when you baking your lights, but in this case I didn't touch anything, so, and the result is like this. And I'm happy about it. Now we will continue with the sequencer in the level. The actual animation part in this project is under the sequencer. Okay, here's our sequencer is opened, and if you notice, the level is looking a little bit different because I turned off the exponential height fog in the level and also changed the engine scalability settings to low for we can see everything clearly, and I'm trying to solving the FPS drop issues while we in sequencer, because when we select the camera it's also rendering the camera in separate window, so it renders the level 2 times, I think, and it makes the scene slower. So here is our camera selected, and here we can see all the keyframes for this camera for almost 21,000 frames, and we can see the trajectory for all this movement, which is I call the trajectory of death. Okay, and we can see a little box in front of the camera, which is a blocking volume, and the collision preset is set to block all, and this little guy is creating the physics interaction when the sequencer playing and the camera is moving like this, and all the other physical assets that I'm using in the level, like this light, the little trash on the level, or the pills that we saw before in the dark area, can collide with this blocking volume before they are so close to the lens and it's fixing the issue. The objects can fly through the camera like this, and like we are invisible. And the volume box, blocking volume I mean, using the same transform values in all the axes, which is coming from the camera. I just copy the keys from the camera movement, camera transition, which is the location and the rotation, and paste them into the blocking volume instead of animating it separately. And also the blocking volume scale is fixed in here, which is 0.25, and it's not changing while the sequencer is playing. Okay, let's look at the other important thing in the sequencer, which is the flashlight. So how can we take the flashlight from the level while the camera is moving? It's really simple. When we play the sequencer, the camera is slowly coming from the door, and let's change into the unlit to see it clearly, and let's zoom in a little bit to see what's going on. Still too fast. Okay, So this is the effect for the flashlight. It's separately animated in this point until we go with the camera, and then again in certain point, I think it's here. Yeah. After this point, the flashlight is using the same transition values like the blocking volume, the location and the rotation from the camera. Just copy and paste it for the flashlight, and all the other frames are going with that value. Let's turn back a little bit. We go too far. Okay, the camera is here and the flashlight is here. If we zoom in a little bit, we can see the pills are flying in front of the blocking volume. In this point, the blocking volume pushes the pills in this direction because they are physical actors and the gravity is disabled in the level, so they can act like they are in 0G, and they fly like this and hit the door and bounce around randomly, depends on their collision. Okay, this is the place where the camera and the spotlight separate for a moment, for a second, and came together again. Here the worm attacked to our player, and we fall back like this, and the camera direction and the spotlight direction is different in this point, but the movement is really fast, so we can't notice anything, but we lose the control of the spotlight when we see the animation in the lit mode. So it's really creating the falling effect, or losing the controlling effect as a character. And the last thing is the last part of the animation, is here, which is the worm attacks us again. And the camera is randomly, and the flashlight is randomly rotating around without any proper movement. So I edit them like the worm is attacking and cutting the video stream, like I said before. And the worm is coming from nowhere. It's just like teleporting here and attacking. So let's look at the worm 2. Here is the animations for the worm in the level. There is only 2 animation, attack 1 and attack 2, and they are transition between each other. like this, so it can change the animation in a smooth way. The other thing is that I want to say excuse me, is about the door, and it's here. Now you can see this key, and all the other keys looks different. The green one is the linear one, so when you play the animation, it doesn't start with the ease effect, or it doesn't end with the ease out effect. This is the linear one. If you want to change it, select your key, just right click on it and change it to linear, or change it to cubic from the linear again. It depends on you, it depends on your animation. And let's talk about the lens effect and the particles that we are using in the level. Let me type the camera here, and here is the camera. Let's see what happens. Okay. If you remember the dirt mask effect, when we getting under this light, we clearly see that, but in the other parts of the level, we doesn't see that. Only in the dark area, when we look at the directly into the light source of the flashlight, we see that effect. So how is that possible? Is really simple. When you select the post-processing settings, you can actually key the dirt mask intensity setting by clicking this icon here. So if you are in sequencer, if you click this icon for the settings which you want to edit, and it sends this setting into the sequencer, and you can change the value of it, which is starting from here. Let me see. Okay, now here it's equals to 0, and it slowly turns up the intensity until we see the light source directly from the camera, which is the maximum value of it, and fade out when we turn our faces in another angle. And the same thing for the spotlight that we see in this area. It's creating the dirt mask effect again when we look like this, when we see the spotlight like this. And the last thing is the particles that we use. If you remember, we had an issue. There was an explosion in the level while we trying to escape from the ugly worm. And let's find the particles. Okay, here is the keys for this particle. This is an explosion one, and I'm changing the particle activation in the level by setting the keys in sequencer. As you can see, it's changing the state from deactive to active. And we have one more particle here, which is triggering in the sequencer again, and this is just changing the scale of the fire particle, and we see after the explosion much more bigger flames in this area, like the explosion ignite something more in this place. So the other thing is the placements of the audio in the level, the sound effects. Every sound effect in the level almost here in sequencer, and the other sound effects are placed in the level. For example, this pipe sound and the sound for the ventilation system, and also we have nice ambient loops and little scary ambience loops and soundtracks for supporting the level. And we have the explosion sound, which has keying on the volume setting, because after this point I want this explosion sound completely turned off, and the airlock sound is turned on, because there is a fade effect, reverb effect after this point. I don't want to hear that. So this is the sequencer part of this project. There is not so many complicated things. I think I covered them all. And that's all for the animation part. And it's also end of the tutorial for the Abyss project. I hope it helps, and thanks for watching. See you in the next one.